the foreign minister of the Syrian government, Walid Mualem, and she talked about some of the intentions that the Syrian government suspects behind these airstrikes. Take a listen.
It is necessary to distinguish international efforts aimed at fighting terrorism from the clandestine intentions of the US and its allies. Some of these countries have been financing, training, and arming terrorists and illegally bringing them to Syria.
And what's, of course, absolutely crucial in this whole ordeal now developing over Syria, we do know that the Syrian government never approved or requested any involvement from the United States, unlike the Iraqi government that did, in fact, ask for U.S. participation in fighting ISIS. So certainly this is a very big issue in the sense that the Syrian government never gave a green light for these airstrikes. So how exactly the situation is going to unravel and what reaction is going to come remains a big if. Under international law, there needs to be some kind of agreement on behalf of a government if you're going to go ahead and bomb any particular country. And certainly we have not seen this to be the case at all. And also in terms of the international community, of course, there's been no approval from any big international body, such as, for one, the United Nations, of course, and even here in the United States. I mean, of course, there's been no approval from the Congress representing the American people to go ahead with these airstrikes. But we do know that Barack Obama does plan to be here in New York on Wednesday, for one, for the United Nations General Assembly session, where he will be presiding over a United Nations Security Council meeting, where he's expected to sort of push forward and promote this agenda of these airstrikes being conducted. But, certainly many questions remain, not just the legality, but also the efficiency and the risks behind this campaign, as well as any consequences, and most importantly, really, eventually how much the United States is going to get involved militarily on the ground, as well as any timeline to these operations.
The US president first wanted to intervene in Syria in 2011 when he demanded that the country's leader Bashar Assad step down immediately, and the tension kept rising. A year later, Obama said America could get directly involved in Syria if it was proved Assad used chemical weapons in his fight against rebels. The US president kept pushing. In the summer of 2013, he was set for a limited military strike, wherever they unexpectedly backtracked and asked Congress for permission. And finally, 2 weeks ago, he announced looming airstrikes, declaring that the US would take the fight to the jihadists in Syria. Moscow says it's imperative that the US and its allies had the green light from Syria's government. The Russian Foreign Ministry stated that by initiating military action, the coalition now bears full legal responsibility for the results. Well, let's go live now to international relations expert Surem Charlia for more on the situation. Welcome to the program. It's been confirmed that US-led forces also bombed targets near Aleppo. That is what we're hearing, which, of course, is outside Islamic State territory. Is this mission creep that we're seeing, and does Washington even feel limited to picking its targets now?
I don't think they really have a clear-cut mission in any case. I mean, what's happening, I think, is at the behest of some of these neighboring Sunni Arab monarchies. They've decided that they're going to drop ISIS, which previously was promoted by some of these US allies, and they're going to now back new horses. It looks like Raqqa, Aleppo, all these places where they're trying to now displace ISIS through aerial bombardment will be occupied by some of their proxies, which are also Islamists and jihadists, but just happen to be not ISIS. So by, they have, each of them has their own jihadist blue-eyed boys. So there's no sign of any moderate force on the ground that can hold territory which is being displaced through aerial bombardment. And so I think ISIS itself could become history in some time to come, but then there are new forces that are fundamentalists and extremely brutal and are terrorists, which are in a way being encouraged through these kind of bombing campaigns.
Are there echoes of Libya here? Because the Western-led intervention in that country also started with airstrikes. 3 years later, there's still chaos, very little rule of law. Is Syria now in danger of going the same way?
Absolutely, I think that's a good parallel, because now Libya, there are supposedly an Islamist and a secular set of forces, and then the UAE and Egypt are backing one side, while Qatar and Saudi are on the other side. So it's the same old playbook that's being repeated here. Already there's been so much bloodshed. I don't think this conflict is anyway going to improve matters. Syria is far more dubious case for intervention than Iraq, and not only for legal reasons because of the lack of control of the Syrian state over some of these territories. So de facto, they don't have sovereignty, and therefore it's being violated anyway by the US and the Arab allies. Secondly, because Syria, there's no real force on the ground that is credible that can take over. So I think, in a way, it's going to exacerbate things. The US does not have a stomach for full-time military intervention by setting up ground troops, nor do the neighboring countries. So all we're going to see is a series of these strikes that will destabilize the region, that will, in a way, change territory and shift control of territory from one bad hand to the worst one.
Now, we also know that overnight no European countries took part in the bombing of Syria. Why do you think they held back?
Well, it's obvious the Europeans are more observant of sovereignty, and clearly they have supported the limited strikes in Iraq because the Iraqi government has been open to these. But in this case, clearly it's bad, not only illegal, but also bad strategy to not involve the Syrians, not involve the Iranians, not involve Hezbollah. The groups that can actually counter ISIS and defeat them are being kept aside, and the ground is being paved for al-Nusra and some of these other Al-Qaeda affiliated groups to make a comeback. So all of this shows bad strategy on the part of the Americans and their Arab allies, and I think it's going to come back to haunt them, because a year from now, I don't think we're going to see Raqqa or Aleppo getting any better, but rather worse.
International relations expert Reem Cholia, thank you for your input this hour. Now, the US confirms its military was aided by Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Bahrain, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. No European nations took part, as I said, in this initial assault in Syria. However, France had earlier promised to help bomb Islamic State as well. But a key power in the Middle East, Iran, was never part of the coalition. Tehran-based Professor Mohammad Barandi explains why.
The same coalition of the guilty that destroyed Syrian sovereignty and Iraqi sovereignty are now continuing to do the same thing, but in a different way. So once upon a time they were supporting terrorists, and now they're supposedly fighting terrorists, but they are the most guilty of all of the actors in this whole affair. Tehran can't be a part of this coalition of the guilty, because the Iranians from the beginning are one of the few countries that have behaved responsibly. The Iranians supported the Syrian sovereignty. They refused to stand idle when the Americans were helping to create a civil war in the country, when the Americans were allowing the Saudis and others to export extremism into Syria. Iran has helped to contain terrorism. Iran has been strengthening the Iraqi government and strengthening the Syrian government.
Washington has so far ruled out sending in troops to Syria and Iraq. The bombing operation targeted key installations in northern Syria. They included the headquarters of the movement's leaders, command and control centres, troop encampments, training sites, as well as fuel and weapons depots. Well, let's take a look at the weapons that the US and its Arab allies have rolled out. Powerful ship-based Tomahawk cruise missiles were among the ordnance used. America's notorious Predator drones also circled above Syria with their deadly payloads. Several types of US-made jets were in the air. For the F-22 stealth fighter, it was the first ever combat action. America's got the skies covered, but some top US officials say there's no way to beat Islamic State without putting boots on the ground. Here's Skynet Chichika.
We've all heard President Obama say over and over again there will be no U.S. boots on the ground to fight ISIS. He said what the American people wanted to hear, but apparently some former and even current U.S. officials don't seem to believe it. General Ray Odierno, the Army Chief of Staff, told journalists that airstrikes would prove insufficient to achieve the goal of destroying ISIS, which is the stated goal of President Obama. He said, quote, "You've got to have ground forces that are capable of going in and rooting them out," end of quote.
There will have to be, I think, to achieve the mission the president has assigned, some American boots on the ground and in harm's way.
If we reach the point where I believe our advisors should accompany Iraq troops on attacks against specific ISIL targets, I'll recommend that to the president.
Then you have, of course, President Obama's more hawkish opponents like House Speaker John Boehner blasting him for saying U.S. troops will not be engaged in a combat mission on the ground, whether in Iraq or in Syria.
An F-16 is not a strategy. And airstrikes alone will not accomplish what we're trying to accomplish.
On the other end of the pond, 4